In this episode, I'm going to talk about Narts in the closet. That's to say, Narts that are hidden but are with us in a way that we have not recognized before. It's a somewhat controversial idea, but I think potentially it's enormously exciting and one worthy of putting out there for further work and further consideration. The place where I'm going to look, the closet I'm turning to, is that of King Arthur. And I'm sure this is a familiar figure. It's called the Arthurian Romance. It's a series of tales. They have inspired authors for 1,000 years. And even as late as the 19th century, with Tennyson's Idylls of the King, there was material being created to be part of this tradition. This is very much a living tradition, inherent in Western Europe, particularly of Celtic origin, and is a very important part of identity in the repertoire of Celtic civilization as it stands. That means that trying to identify a foreign element is going to meet some resistance, and that's quite to be expected. I'm not the one that came up with this idea. This idea goes back to a colleague of mine, who unfortunately died a few years ago, C. Scott Littleton from Occidental University, and his graduate student, now a doctor, Linda Malcor, an independent scholar. I assessed their arguments and joined in and sort of took sides on this and decided that they were right. Now, why would someone claim that there is a foreign element from the steppes and from the Caucasus, Nart, somewhere in Arthurian tradition, Arthurian romance? Well, if it's Celtic, let's go back in time because we have some very old Celtic material, and let's see what old Celtic material looked like. There were two fundamental cycles, so to speak, in Celtic material. One was the Finn and the Fenian cycle. The person who brought that really into English and into common knowledge was Lady Gregory, a friend of William Butler Yeats, and she taught herself Gaelic and went out and translated what was available then. She was in Ireland and produced a 200-some-odd page book with Finn MacCool, the great hero, who leads a kind of band of men of unspecified size, young men, and they're called the Fenians. And this Finn MacCool, this is means the white one from Cúvail, is the real name for cool. Finn is based on the Celtic word window, not Indo-European, but peculiar to Celtic, meaning white. So he has light hair, that's the idea. The Fenians is based on the same word as English win, to win a battle or something like that. So these are the winners, the ones who fight and win. And that name pops up in a number of other places, in Venice, Venetians, and in the Wends, an ancient people of southern Scandinavia, perhaps of Slavic culture or language, and the word vandal, clearly Germanic, from which we could vandalize. And these people were not well liked in their heyday. But again, those are the warriors that win. That's the idea. So that's a well-attested name. I can tell you what it means. Now, they do a number of exploits. They sort of run around on foot all the time. They're never on horseback. Finn is recognized by the real king of Ireland and is made himself the king of the Fenians. And I argued in an article that this is how the Indo-European nomads came to a happy coexistence with the pre-Indo-European peoples who were not familiar with horse riding. And that's very clearly the case with the Fenians. They never get on a horse except once, and then they're all giants. And it's clearly a late folklore story. So for the 240-some-odd pages of Lady Gregory's account, I think there are 3 or 4 where they're on horseback in one tale. The rest of it's no, they're all running around on foot. And that would be a characteristic pre-Indo-European pattern. But by the time they're tested, and that's true of the Venetians and the Wends and the Vandals, by the time all these people are tested, they are now speaking Indo-European languages of some sort. They've retained all the cultural features and all. So that's one cycle in Ireland. There you have it. The only odd details that are probably worth mentioning is he has a young son named Oisin, which means stag, and Oisin ends up running off with the lady from the land Tir Nanog, the other world, the paradise. And then he had a wife named Sadv, and she is turned into a doe by a druid because she resists the druid's advances, and he gets angry at her, and poof, he turns her into a doe. And he has two brothers that have been turned into hounds. So Bran and Sholin. So there's some odd animal features lurking around in the story. Changing shape is not unusual in Gaelic lore or Welsh lore, so it's not too unusual. If we go now, say, to the other great cycle in Ireland, it's the Cuchulainn or Ulster cycle, and it's about conflicts between two regions, the northern region of Ulster and the western region of Connacht, or Connaught. And the great hero, the leading hero in all that, is Cuchulainn, whose name Cu means hound and Chulainn means of the little hound. So he's a figure that is linked to a blacksmith and is a kind of berserker figure. He has frenzies, he has weird distortions of manner and all that. So he goes on a number of adventures. Often the adventures involve two or three other heroes with whom he's rivals and how they try to best each other. Cuchulainn always comes out on top. And then finally his supreme moment is in the great epic of Ireland, the cattle raid of Cooley. The Tain, it's called. Tain means cattle raid. And he saves the day, really. He fights off the invading army of Connacht and does so single-handedly for most of the battle, most of the war. And he's able to display his magnificent powers and his wisdom and so forth. He has a spirit father, Lug, who's clearly from a kind of earlier generation of heroes. Lug, again, meaning light, sort of like thin, white again, that kind of theme. And Lug is, by this time, after some of his exploits, is sort of in the background as a kind of deity almost. So we have a number of figures here. There is one more that should be mentioned, and this is a young woman, a princess from Connacht, Bedivere. And the Fenda part is, again, this word white, in a slightly different form. And then Bear means the woman born white, a white-born woman. And she is a figure seen on the ramparts, spies the hero, falls in love with heroes, and this sort of thing. So she's a figure as well. So these are sort of a very quick survey of the inventory. We could do the Welsh too. Their relevance to the Arthurian saga is even lower. Rhiannon and a few other figures, Pirri, and this are found in the Welsh material. But let's go to King Arthur now. There is a transition to some old King Arthur, written by some Anglo-Saxon writers, Wace and Layamon, both, and Wolfram von Eschenbach, a German one. And we see some drifting away, and then we get the canonical form of King Arthur with Malory in Le Mot Arthur, written in French, Old French, and apparently based in Brittany, in some area like that, which was old Armorica in the Roman times. What is evident when you look at that material and you go back and look at your older Irish and Welsh material is that something has happened to this tradition. This is not a direct continuation of the Celtic heritage. And despite the importance of this, a pivotal central role in modern Celtic identity and a sense of heritage, something has happened here. The scholar cannot ignore this. There has been some foreign importation. Someone has brought a whole range of things in, such as what? Well, we can rattle through the inventory. One is a round table. They're all sitting around, they're all equals. This is not a warband in that sense anymore. It's more like a band of brothers, equal in some sense. And these are the knights of the round table. You have knights. You have figures that come in wearing a certain kind of armor. There's no armor really mentioned, except for waxed leather and whatnot in the earlier Irish material. And even the Romans tell us that the Celts often disdained armor altogether, or even clothing in the battlefield. So here we come in with the classic medieval European male armor. We have the swords. Cuchulainn is as likely to use a javelin as he is a sword. No javelins here. But you do get jousting with a long lance. That's also true. Horseback, horseback, horseback. How do they fight? Well, Finn and the Finians are on foot. Cuchulainn's always in a chariot. Right? None of this horseback stuff. Now we're on horseback. Chariots are gone, forgotten, basically. All right, that's one thing. What else do we have going on here? We have a Grail, a quest for a Grail, a sacred chalice or cup of some sort. That's not in the old material. It doesn't happen. Nothing about that. They drink, they get a fancy cup to prove that they're a great hero, but all three get a cup, and it's just a gift given as a kind of hospitality gift by the Queen of Connacht when the heroes visit and whatnot. How about the names? Do we find Cuchulainn anywhere? Nah, he's gone. Do we find Finn McCool anywhere? Nope. Do we find the Fenians anywhere? Nope. And in fact, a lot of the names in King Arthur are not Celtic. It's not clear what they are. Well, we're going to find out. We're going to try to throw light on that. Okay. We have a sword and a stone, and the extraction of that weapon from the rock is proof that the young Arthur is destined to be king. Don't have that anywhere in the preceding material from the older Celtic layer of folklore. Okay. We have a lady of a lake who receives back another sword, gives us a second sword, Excalibur, and in the end, when Arthur dies or is transmogrified into a kind of enduring spirit of some sort, takes back this special sword. This is completely new. This is not in the old material as well. Okay. And in fact, we have this funny episode where Arthur is failing. He has a faithful knight, Sir Bedivere, who's going to comfort him in his last moments. He asks Sir Bedivere to throw the sword away. Bedivere doesn't want to do it, fakes it. Arthur asks, "What did you see?" And he knows when Bedivere says, "Well, I'm in the lake," that he's lying. He knows he's lying. And finally, Bedivere does give it, and then it comes back, an arm shoots out of the lake and grabs the sword. It's the lady's arm, and she pulls it down into the water. And he comes back and says, "It was amazing. There was this arm, that his lady's arm came out and got this." Yes, okay. And then a boat comes and takes him away to Avalon, where he can live till he's needed again and be brought back. But Bedivere is Celtic name, and it means the one who knows the grave. Okay. Now, yeah, if Arthur simply died and was buried there, and then this boat with the ladies and the trip back to the eternal land of Avalon is kind of a bardic add-on, which it looks like. Yeah, then the name makes sense, and it's a Celtic name, okay? But it's not a name found in the older Celtic material, okay? So that's sort of an inventory of some of the problems, some of the rupture, so to speak, some of the evidence that something has happened in the Celtic tradition that leads us from the older attested material that we do have up to King Arthur and its vibrant continued life up into the present day. Right. What kind of source can we identify for the rupture? What cause? Where did these other new elements come from? All right, well, let's talk again. Let's go back and go over the inventory. Round table. Why a round table? It means there's no head of the table, and even with the king sitting there, they're all more or less equals. Right. Where do we find round tables? Well, that theme has been pursued, and there is one talk about it going back to some ancient tribe in what's now Turkey, and someone that made wheels and used the wheel for a table and whatnot and the other. I think the obvious solution is this, is that if you go to the Caucasus, and particularly go to the Circassians, non-Indo-European people who also have these Nart sagas, that they serve food on a round table. And a round table is the only place, the only kind of table you're going to find. It's called the Anna in the language, and that's it. Now, the use of it in a large form to bring equality may be an innovation that is not seen even in Circassian, but at least the table is there. So we can pinpoint the place where the round table is coming from, at least as it is embedded in folklore, if not in archaeology. So, okay, that looks like a Caucasian link, and the Caucasian link is a Nart link. And the Caucasian means the Caucasus Mountains, the beautiful hills behind Sochi Olympic sites and all that. Okay. Now let's go and look at the Grail. The Grail is considered a Christian symbol. It was a chalice used at the Last Supper. It's to vindicate the purity of the knight pursuing it and all this. It may have links back, as Dr. Lin has suggested to me, back to Odysseus when raising his cup to tell his story. So it may be a very old symbol. But where do we find it as proof of purity, proof of truth, where it has this moral mechanism built into it? It's in the Nart sagas, and it is in its purest form in the Ossetian Nart sagas, and the Ossetians are a population that continues the old steppe Iranian culture and language. What is it there? It's called the Nartamonge. The what? The Nartamonge. And even I puzzled over that because it's a name of somebody, Nart so-and-so. And Nart simply means hero. Hero what? And it's hero Amonga. It's a possessive form of the name Amonga. Now, poor Amonga is otherwise totally forgotten. There are no Nart sagas that I've been able to find that have him in it. But his chalice or his bucket or his vat is still there. And what happens with that vat, you come up and tell your account of what you've done, what your heroic deed is, and if it's true, that vat bubbles over. And if it's false, it dries out. Okay. Now we find in Circassian, Abkhazian, and Ubykhlor a barrel of white wine, and it's just a barrel. There's nothing special. It's not anyone's fancy cup or chalice or bowl, but it is filled with the wine, and it will boil over if you tell the truth, and it'll dry out if you're lying. So these receptacles have built in a kind of moral machinery that vindicates the hero and reveals the liar. And this makes them a mechanical equivalent to the Grail. The Grail now is shrunken by Christian tradition and reassigned to a different origin. So Amonga is not Jesus, but the machinery is the same, and the behavior of the water, assuming, or the wine would probably be the same as well. So the Grail clearly is a Nart import of some sort with a Christian trapping on it. What else is there? There's the chivalric principle, ethos of the Knights of the Round Table, the chivalric combat, the quest for honor, the granting of reprieves and rematches and these sorts of things. We find this in the Nart sagas as well. The general scholarly opinion is that chivalry somehow arose as a byproduct of the Crusades. This suggests not, and in fact we have evidence of chivalric combat in the Nart sagas that must be much older than the Crusades. One involving rival hero against a kind of storm god, monster villain, and in fact there's a reprieve as well. Chivalric combat is observed, and that's the old storm god battle, and we have a very similar behavior in the Rig Veda, which is at least 3,000 years old in its actual form. Then chivalry and the idea of honorable combat is very, very old, and it's conveyed or captured in the Nart sagas, and this may have been brought in by some kind of Iranians that brought in something like Nart sagas. So this would imbue the entire ethical structure and backbone of the Arthurian cycle, the Arthurian romance, with an Iranian form, a Central Asian form that is preserved in the North Caucasus and preserved in King Arthur, and has a common source in some way. Let's look at Sword in the Stone. Where do we find somebody that might have something like that? Well, in accounts later than Herodotus, accounts of the Sarmatian and Atlantic nomads of the steppes, we hear about a sword cult. And they had swords, they had lances. And what did they do? They stuck the sword in the ground. And the sword may have looked sort of like a cross with a hilt and all this. And they prayed to the sword in the ground to give them true heroism, true nature. Now, in the Nart sagas, there's something even more interesting. There is an incident in which a hero named Shibatanokwo is gaining access to a feast, and he has to go by a beautiful woman who has a bunch of suitors, and he plunges his lance. He can't go into the dining area with his lance. He plunges it into the ground. And he sort of scorns the suitors, scorns the advances of the beautiful woman. He has a mission. He can't be diverted from his mission. Now, while he's inside, the suitors, seeing him as a rival, try to pull his lance out of the ground. They somehow they understand that if they can do that, they're as good as he is. They can't make it budge. When he's fulfilled his mission, which is to save his father and sort of kill a whole bunch of treacherous Narts that have set up the father for murder, he comes back out, he pulls the lance out, no problem at all. It's just he comes gliding right out. What does this do? It attests to the fact that he, and he alone, is the real hero here, the supreme one. Okay. There's another incident, it's a little less clear. There's an issue of giving a sacred drink of the gods to a mortal hero. This hero is Colarusso. This is an Abaza story in the 2002 volume from Princeton. And one of the justifications for recognizing Colarusso as the supreme hero is put forward by the god of the forge, Crept. And Crept and Colarusso are linked. Now that's sort of like the link of Cuchulainn with Culann, the god of the blacksmith in Irish. But the details are different, and this would seem to be a kind of Indo-European theme that's come down in both, even though Abazas are not Indo-European. It's a good story. They've borrowed it. They've taken it on. So Colarusso deserves the special drink because what did he do? He ripped the anvil of the god of the forge, rips Clept's anvil out of Earth's 7 layers and plunges it back into Earth's 9 layers. 9 layers, Dante, the 9 layers of heaven, the 9 layers of hell. There's something about this 9-layer business. This has crept into Italy, too. So, Colarusso somehow has access and can move stuff back and forth between the very heart and structure of the earth itself. That's sort of what this somehow symbolizes. And the extraction, Arthur's extraction as a young man, or youth really, pulling the sword out of the stone means that he has some kind of intimate contact with the earth. He can gain access to it or escape from it in some way. He is vindicated as the supreme one. In this case, he's going to become king. In the case of the Nart sagas, it's just the supreme absolute hero. And this goes back apparently to sticking the sword in the earth as an object of worship by the steppe Iranians, by the Alans apparently. And this would be not Celtic. This is brought in from outside as well. Now, how about the Lady of the Lake and the second sword? The second sword is the one with the name Excalibur, meaning from Caliburna, or something like this. Now, people are puzzled over that name frequently, and without great result. There's supposed to be a tribe of smiths named the Caliburnes, and there's very little evidence for that. I can tie it into a name of an Amazon, California, after which the state is named. And California was a queen of the Amazons, and her name means something like beautiful copulation, something like this. The Cali part is beautiful. It's also the same Cali part in the Bornes. My guess it means beautiful burnt thing, or beautiful tempered thing, something like this. That it's a description of the sword. It's not about its origin. But there's an X on the front of it because they probably lost track of what it meant and decided, well, it must have come from some factory or blacksmith shop called the Caliburnes or something like that. Maybe there was such a thing. And maybe that's why there's supposed to be this tribe of smiths. But in any event, the special sword is associated with the Lady of the Lake. And at the end, as I already mentioned, when Bedivere is offering comfort to the dying Arthur, it has to go back to the Lady of the Lake. Nothing like this in the earlier Celtic material. Okay, well, can we find a sword being somehow either given or thrown back into a lake? Well, the given part, no, but thrown back in the lake, oh yes. And this is in the Ossetian Nart sagas. And there is a figure there named Batrads. And Batrads is sort of the biggest, wildest, meanest of all the heroes. If they want to take a castle and say, hey, put me in the slingshot or put me in the cannon and blast me and I'll burst through the walls like a cannonball or a giant spear or something like that, and I'll take out the castle. He dwells among the clouds. He only comes down to earth once in a while. He fights heavenly beings and kills them, kills the angels of God and all this. He's clearly a transitional figure between being a god of some sort and being a hero. He's kind of a blend of both. And he's uncontrollable. Even God says, I have no power over his life or death. Even God himself, and these are Christianized people, the Ossetians. By and large, there are some Muslims, and religious tolerance is a characteristic of the North Caucasus, so it's not all that important. But he gets tired of living. And he says, build me a big funeral pyre and put the bellows at the corner so it can get really hot. Sort of like the blacksmith's forge. And Dr. Linda and I have discussed the issue of whether some of these figures, in fact, are descended from a kind of a mythology of iron making and the invention of iron making and the transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age. And I think that Dr. Will Lynn, is really smack on with this idea. And the Narts gather around the bellows, they like the pyre, they blow it on it, and Batrad's like a true man, literally made of steel, and he's dark like steel, and he begins to heat up. He becomes red hot, and at some point he's tired. He keeps cutting off the heads of the guys trying to man the bellows. They're having a hard time, and he finally gets tired of it all, and he tosses his sword. He says, take my sword, throw it in the lake, and the lake is the Black Sea, and they take it and they throw it in, and the sea boils and turns blood red. And then it's gone, and Batrads dies. I have a friend and colleague, Victor Mayer at the University of Pennsylvania. He's probably one of the foremost sinologists in the Western world. He has found a similar folktale in Western China, among not the Chinese, but among the Uyghur or Turkic people. And the Uyghur, although they speak a Turkic language, seem to represent a continuation of an old European-like population. They look like Europeans. And they probably originally spoke an Indo-European language. And this seems to be a retention, after changes in language and thousands of years of history, of an old Indo-European motif or tale in which some kind of a hero tosses a magic or powerful sword back into the water from whence it came, presumably in some way. So this sword in the lake, into the lake, even though it has a Celtic knight sort of facilitating all this, is clearly a Nart saga importation. It is a preservation of a pattern from Central Asian North Caucasus region. Now, is there any Celtic at all in this material? Yes, there is some Celtic material. First of all, we have Guinevere, the great queen of King Arthur. Arthur himself goes back to some kind of a Roman word, Artorius, and there was a Roman governor of Armorica or Brittany back in the Roman period. And Arthur, I'm going to talk about him in a second. Arthur may go back to this, but Guinevere is the Welsh version of Bedivere. She's still there, and she falls in love with a great hero, just as Bedivere wants to fall in love with a great hero. But it's not the king, it's Lancelot. And so she has undergone what we call in mythology a moral inversion. Bedivere is guiltless. She's pure, she's fine. There's no problem with Bedivere in the Irish tradition, or with Guinevere. But in Guinevere in the Arthur saga has undergone a sort of moral inversion. She offers herself sexually to one of the knights of the Round Table, Lancelot. So it seems almost as though it's a fulfillment of Bendivere's desires from the Celtic period, with also a kind of warband figure, a woman who sort of is the mother of the warband, and then perhaps also had routine sexual liaisons with members of the warband. That would be a Nart saga form that we do see in the Ossetian, but it's now grafted onto a figure who's a morally inverted, now a sinner committing adultery, a morally inverted sort of fertility figure, a continuation of Bedivere, white-born one. Why do I say fertility figure? Because Bedivere, Guinevere, white-born, foam-born, Aphrodite, and that's the Greek god of fertility, goddess of fertility. So it's clear that some kind of early fertility figure here evolved in Celtic into a young woman. It's always a young woman's fertile, and this has continued on. How about the name Lancelot itself? Well, this is a real worry. No one knows quite what to make of it. One theory that Scott Littleton put forward, and I myself endorsed, is that it has something to do with the name Alan, Lancelot. And lot, we use it in English, but it's a Celtic word meaning land. And in fact, it would be someone of the Alan land. Well, where's the A on the front? The A in Celtic is the word the. You see it in Ankara. What? That's the capital of Turkey, right? Originally, that was Angora, Angora bull, and it simply meant the center, the heart. And it was smack in the middle of what was to become Turkey. In the Roman period, it was Anatolia, and it was the Galatians to whom converted to Christianity. Gaul, Galatians, all this. And so it's the. It means it would be interpreted, it was originally Alan Salat, the one from the Alan land, but the A has been pried off, reinterpreted as a the, so it just comes out as Lancelot. That's one possibility. There may be others, there have been others, but this one I think somehow fits into the overall pattern we're seeing of Nart saga importation and links to Central Asian and ancient Iranian lore. So I do think that this is a likely source of the name. Let's go to Sir Bedivere. Now, this perhaps a bit unnerving. The word for bed is common both to Celtic and to Germanic. It's a cognate, but confined to those two branches of Indo-European. Of course, in Germanic, it means the bed where you lie down, go to sleep for the night. In Celtic, you lay down, you didn't get up. That was the end of it. So it meant grave in Celtic. And the Bedivere, there's a D missing, it would be widri, and widri is wit, knowing, and re is gente VR in English, but RE in Celtic. So the one who knew, the knower of the grave. So that's a good Celtic name. All right. Now, he doesn't pop up anywhere in the earlier Celtic material. Maybe we just don't have it. Maybe we lost it. Maybe he was there. But specifically tied to an incident. It's as though he's nameless and requires a name in the mouths of a Celtic-speaking bard simply to explain his presence at the death of Arthur. So my guess is, yeah, he's Celtic, but he's an innovation, and so we can sort of set him aside, not worry about him anymore. Do we have anything else that we want to look at in terms of names? Let's go to one of the names here that is not Celtic, but has very interesting possibilities, and that's Sir Kay. Usually spelled K-A-Y, I guess, in the Celtic it would have been C-A-Y. This is not a Celtic name. It's transparently an Iranian name. Which Iranian is this? Well, if you go to the Shahnameh, the great epic of Iran, you get a kind of magician, a kind of powerful figure named Caius. And he's a Shah, becomes a Shah, and he gives rise to the Khayanid dynasty. The Us part is a second name that's been grafted on. If you go back farther, over to India, which is related ultimately to the Iranian languages, and go to the Rig Veda, which is probably more than 3,000 years old, as I mentioned, you'll find a magician named Kavya Ushanas. And he's a human, but he's physician to the demons. And his daughter gets involved with a Rig Vedic king and so forth. But the Kavya Ushanas gets shortened to Caius, gets shortened to Kai and Kayanids, and here you have Sir Kay. So this name is like, you couldn't ask for a more transparently Iranian name with a pedigree of that sort, going all the way back to Indo-Iranian, the sub-branch, or the branch of Indo-European from which the sub-branches of the Indic languages and the Iranian languages both evolved. So there, looking at us is an Iranian wizard, so to speak, now a knight of the round table, that has come in and is now an integral part, a member of the Arthurian cycle. Let's finish off by talking about Arthur himself. Okay. The Roman governor was Artorius Castus, And Artorias meant something like, well, Castus is pious, and Castor and Pollux, the divine twins. And all. Castus was pious, and Artorias was something like someone linked to the priesthood or something like this. He was clearly probably a member of some sort of old priestly family that had pursued a military career. He returned to Rome, and while he was gone, his son seized the governorship, came back and had to fight his son, and the son killed him, apparently. So this is like Mordred killing Arthur, or wounding Arthur mortally, this sort of thing. And the name looks like a distortion of the Roman name. Now, a Celtic scholar would put forward and say, look, it's the word for bear. Arctos is the original, and Indo-European, Arctic, you get in Greek as Arctos. And it comes out as Arth in Celtic. Well, that's fine, but we linguists are a picky bunch. We like to know what happened to the ur. Why is the ur there? And the Celtic scholar can't supply any origin for the ur part of Arthur. All right, let's suppose that the Romans, and we know they did this, were bringing in steppe Iranian mercenaries to fight on the frontiers, and Armorica was on one of the frontiers. So let's suppose that they were being led by Arthur, Artorias. And let's suppose at some point that locally the name came out as Arthur. Now, what would the Iranians have made of that name? Okay. Well, in Iranian it makes good sense, and actually the sense is not so far off of that from the Latin. Arth would have been fire, Arthravan, and the Iranians had a caste or a clan of priests who tended the fires of Zoroastrianism, and Artesh is fire, Arthravan would have been the priest of the fire. The Hor would have been sun, from Indo-European root swalno, from which we get in English, believe it or not, sun, Russian solnitsa, Greek helios, things like that. But the Iranian comes out as Hor. But in Iranian, it meant not just sun, but it meant a nimbus of light, a halo. This is where the halo comes from. Even the name of it. It's kind of the Greek distortion of the Iranian reinterpretation. Helios, halo. And it meant that this fire priest had visible manifestation that he was fit to rule, fit to lead, that he was endowed with the sacred light and power of the rulership, in this case, governorship or generalship of the Iranian horde. So I'm suggesting that Arthur is, in fact, a distortion of a Roman name, not in Celtic mouths, but in Iranian mouths. And that reflects the Iranian nomadic mercenary band that Arthur led. And so I think we can now understand some of the influences that have reshaped a kind of core Celtic body of material and brought to it a kind of vivid, expanded, dramatic form that has still reverberated down with us and still is a living form of epic and oral tradition, now written down, of course, in the movies and everything else. But I think it's produced a beautiful example of two cultures coming together and producing a richer, more vibrant, and long-lived tradition.